Well, I think we both share a compulsion in some ways with maintaining streaks. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I've done the Davis double. I'm going to do it again next year, and then the next year, and the next year. And by that time, it's like, oh my God, I can't break this streak. I've got to
I
go
know.
back next year and do it
Yes.
again. And that really came to an end for me. I think in one very specific place. I was already kind of thinking about this, but this was about 8 years ago or so. I was on a double century here. Uh, we're up in the Napa Valley at a rest stop, and I was talking to a friend of mine and kind of sharing, which rides we're going to do. And I mentioned that, I was going to do that ride and the Davis Double, and then another one down in Southern California, and a course down there in Southern California that I didn't really like. I mean, I did the ride every year because it was convenient. And he said, Eric, you don't have to do it. Nobody. I'll never forget. He said, nobody really cares.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, yeah, that's right. Nobody
Yeah.
really does care. If I stop doing these rides, they're going to keep on happening, and
Yeah.
the world is going to keep on spinning.
Yeah.
Um, so that one moment was where it really hit me.
This week we have Eric Norris, who lives in Carmichael, California. Many people know him from his very popular PBP tip videos on YouTube. Eric has 3 PBPs, 1 DNF, and in 2023 he chose to volunteer rather than ride. He also has approximately 200 double centuries to his name, including 37 Davis doubles. Finally, Eric also had a very well-known Campy Components fan site in the early days of the internet, and it's why many still refer to him as Campy Only Guy. Eric, thank you so much for joining.
Glad to be here.
And as I mentioned to you off mic, and that's a real professional term, um, you were extremely helpful, your videos, in the run up to my first PBP. You pretty much covered everything, and I really appreciate it, okay?
Glad to hear that.
Okay, so maybe let's just start a little bit off topic, right? Um, I'm first interested in your Campy Only website. I know
Hmm.
well, it's not that recent, but you have a video about that. And then also just your YouTube channel. So the Campy Only website dates back to the late 90s, which is incredible. I know
Hmm.
it's no longer active. And then your YouTube channel started in 2007. So it almost seems like, Eric, you just these newer technologies and you wanted to put content out and publish things. So maybe you
Hmm.
want to just talk a little bit about that compulsion and sickness.
It is a bit of a sickness,
Okay,
but
good.
yeah, I've always been interested in technology. I got my first computer was a Timex Sinclair,
Oh,
which
wow.
you
I
may have.
remember that.
You,
Yeah, that they were
yeah, the, the
English, isn't that
the
right?
little
Yeah.
tiny thing, and you plugged it into a television, and you plugged a
Yeah.
cassette player into it to load
Yeah.
programs, and that was like 1982, something like
Wow.
that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've always been interested in that stuff, and I've got a whole video, and I'm sure you can put a link to my YouTube
I
channel
will.
down
I'll put
in
it.
the
Yeah,
description.
definitely.
So if people go there, I did a whole video about the Campy Only website, but it started, I mean, really briefly, it started as one page on a personal website and then kind of took over everything else. And yeah, I kept that going for quite a while. I had a couple million views by the time I
Yeah.
was done.
Yeah.
Um, and finally, just decided I just wasn't interested in putting the work in anymore. And
Okay.
so I just kind of killed it off. It's still there. If you watch my video,
Yeah.
you can read about that. It's still there on the internet,
That's cool.
campyonly.com.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then YouTube was the next thing, and making content for that and kind of learning how to make videos.
Yeah.
It's just all kind of fascinating to me. It's something that's always interested me.
Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll touch more on that. Actually, maybe I'll ask, do you remember your first PBP tip video or PBP content video?
Well, yes, I did videos after my 2011 and 2015
Okay.
PBPs,
Okay. Yeah.
just about the ride. Um, and then starting in 2018 was when
Yeah.
I decided to start the PBP Tips series. And the first one of those was just basically, hey, is it worth it? is it worth it to put all the work in?
Yeah.
And from there it just kind of expanded into, and
Yeah.
there's a few dozen, like 3 dozen.
So is it worth it, Eric? That's the question. You didn't answer it. Okay.
Well, I would say absolutely yes.
Okay, good. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
was hoping it was. Okay, good. All right, let's go back to our normal questions then. Okay, I always
yeah.
start with this one. What does PBP mean to you? So it's a very open-ended question.
Well, PBP initially, I had been doing long distance riding for a long time. My first century, my first 100-mile ride was about 1981 or so. And then in 83, I did my first Davis double. So I've been doing long distance riding for a long time. And when you're in that, arena, there's always talk about PBP. And I didn't really know that much about it, but started learning more about it. So I certainly knew what the ride was. So it was really the next step. It was that next challenge,
Yeah,
the next mountain to climb, whatever. And what finally kind of put us over the edge was some friends and I had been doing a lot of long distance riding on fixed gear bikes starting around 2005.
wow.
In 2006, we rode cross country. So I rode from California to Kansas on a fixed gear. So, several mountain ranges in between there.
God.
Um, and we thought, well, gosh, PVP is coming up next year. We're all pretty much
Yeah.
in shape now. Let's do something completely stupid
Okay.
and go take fixed gear bikes over there.
Nice. That
Um,
was stupid. You're right. Yeah.
it was stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a writer from Davis named Amy Rafferty who I don't know if she does this anymore, but she was uh, did PVP several times. I think she was a local RBA, etc.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. We were sitting in the hotel in Sankatan before the ride, and she said, it's stupid riding it on a fixed gear. You know that, don't you?" And I was like, "Oh, no, no, it'll be fine." And she was right, of course. It was
Yeah.
totally stupid, but we did it.
Yeah. This whole thing is just degrees of stupidness, isn't that right? Like it's all stupid what long
Oh
distance
yeah, yeah.
riding, the whole
My
thing.
wife has totally the right opinion about all of this,
Yes.
which is you're stupid. Why are you doing this? You know?
Yeah, it's funny. My wife's similar, and it seems to keep us the marriage alive. I don't know. She just sees me as this idiot, basically. So it's funny.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember? And like we'll go into detail later, but like how did you feel on that fixie bike in 2007? Sorry, what
Hmm.
was your first 2007?
Hmm.
So do you remember getting across that line at PBP? How did you feel?
Finish finishing it? Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. I was totally wasted.
yeah,
Um, it was a. I don't know if you want to go into like the whole ride here, but um, the last day, because we had done the 84-hour start, so we were finishing in the afternoon of the fourth day. So we had 3.5 days. That last day, because we had only, because of a whole variety of things, including being on fixed gear bikes,
yeah,
we had only gotten about, I don't know, 5 hours of sleep in three and a
yeah,
half days.
yeah,
A few naps here and there. So that last day, the weight of all that sleep deprivation finally started
yeah,
hitting. I was probably maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 kilometers from the finish. Uh, and I pulled over and laid on the ground. My bike's next to me. Everything was kind of spinning. And I remember one of the ride marshals came up on his motorcycle and he stopped and looked down at me and said, "C'est fini? Are you done?" And
yeah,
I'm like, "No, no, no, I'll get back
yeah,
on the bike." And so I finished it somehow. A friend of mine, a guy named Mark, uh, ended up kind of catching up with me. And Mark was always a talker. He was one of these guys who was just always talking.
yeah,
And I said, "Mark, keep talking to me because I'm going to fall asleep." And
yeah,
he helped me finish the ride. I finished. I gave him my control card and I staggered over to the edge of the gymnasium and I
yeah,
just collapsed.
yeah.
And I just
So
laid there for a while.
did you
Uh,
feel immediately like satisfied, or you'd completed something, or you were just so tired at that moment that you had no emotions really?
I would say it was more no emotions. I mean,
Yeah,
definitely, I realized I had finished it. Um, but I was so exhausted at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it's the most exhausted, the most, the most just utterly destroyed I've ever been.
Yeah.
Nothing else compares to that. That
Yeah. And am I right in saying the kind of satisfaction came later? Is that right? Or did you ever feel satisfied about what you had, that achievement?
oh, it definitely came later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely came later, and uh, especially that year because the conditions were so bad. The rate of abandons was several
Yeah.
times higher than it usually is
Yeah. And
because it was just
on a fixed bike, my God,
and on
crazy.
the fixed gear bike, yeah, it was just crazy.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's great. Tell me about your background in cycling, and we go straight all the way back to your childhood. Like, do you remember your first time on a bike?
I remember one of the first times I was ever on a
Yeah.
bike. My parents put me on it, and I remember going kind of down a slope
Yeah.
and kind of toward this area where some kids were playing marbles. And I
Yeah.
remember riding, not being able to stop, and going right through their marble game and almost running into them. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was probably maybe the first time I was ever on a bike,
Yeah.
uh, just like off by myself and
Yeah.
went downhill
It,
and almost hit somebody.
it is funny, like even people that don't ride today as they get older, everyone seems to have that first memory of being let go of on a bicycle. Like it's
Hmm.
pretty incredible.
Yeah,
And then, did you like? I know you got into double centuries. That was really your gateway to PBP.
yeah.
Did you always ride like through high school, college, all that kind of stuff, or was it something you started at a little bit later?
Started pretty much in college. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
had ridden, but it pretty much started in college, and then was when I got out of college. Well, yeah, when I got out of college was when I really started riding the long
yeah.
distance stuff.
And this was in California, I think.
Yeah.
You grew up in California,
Hmm.
and was this like the '80s? And you were the weirdo on a bicycle. No one else rode bicycles. Is that right?
Uh, I wouldn't say that, but it was a smaller group back then.
Yeah,
Um, I think California is maybe different from other parts of the country, and there has been a long history of the double century rides
yeah,
here in this state. We have the California Triple Crown, which people may know about. I mean, if you're here
yeah.
in California and doing those kinds of rides, you know about it. And they started up in about 1990 or so.
Okay.
And the idea was that they had a list of rides, and I think it started with like six different double centuries. And if you did three of them in a year, you were a Triple Crown finisher.
Yeah,
And it's, they have a website and they've got all kinds of records of all, who's ridden what. So there's really no, eventually, if you did enough rides, they have an annual award ceremony and you get a little plaque. I've got some around here someplace
yeah,
for doing, different get kind of higher up.
yeah.
But that really kind of got me hooked. It's like, okay, well, now I've got a reason to go and do at least three doubles.
Yeah, exactly. Brief aside, like I used to do the Marin double
Hmm.
um, every year. And I think I started almost from the beginning, maybe not from the beginning, but the only reason I stopped was they stopped offering it. So thankfully, right, the streak ended, which is good. We'll talk about streaks later, but that's cool. Um, Tell me about like just why do you ride?
I've always liked riding. I like getting out and seeing things, and uh, I love the technology. I'm very much into classic bikes. If you can see, some of the ones behind me, very much into traditional, lug steel bikes.
Yeah.
So not so much. I've never owned a carbon fiber bike. Probably never will.
Okay, you're an
Um,
extremist. We know that already, isn't it right?
yeah.
Campy only. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I've expanded beyond that too, but uh, the technology and just the beauty of the sport has always appealed to me.
Yeah.
Um, and even though I think part of the attraction now is that even though we're all getting older, and I'm not riding probably as fast as I was 20 years ago,
Yeah.
I still feel the same on the bike. So
Yeah.
I feel like there's that continuity between the me of 1980 whatever and the me of today.
Yeah.
I still have fun, and
Yeah.
I still feel like I'm going fast.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, uh, I have a later question. We'll talk about that kind of relationship with biking over so many years, right?
Hmm.
Um, but it is great that you can maintain that relationship with biking. Okay. We'll talk more about it later because that fascinates me. It's something in my life I hope to maintain. Okay. How did you originally hear about PBP? What was the first time you heard those three letters?
Oh gosh, probably sometime in the mid '90s. I'd have to go back and see. Like,
Yeah.
there was a PBP, I think in like '97 or so,
Yeah.
um, and I did a ride. Forget if it was right before or after that one,
Yeah.
and people were talking about it.
Yeah.
This was the ride that I'm thinking of was a double century. You went from San Francisco to LA in a weekend, so you did two back to
Wow.
back 200-mile rides, and there were people there who were talking about PvP, and that kind of piqued my interest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
So then,
I I had known about it for a long time before I actually went over and did it.
yeah. So as you just mentioned, you decided to do it with your buddy on a fixed bike, which is kind of
Hmm.
crazy. um, First of all, logistics. Do you remember the logistics of getting to France that first time? Was it stressful?
Uh, well, yeah, because I'd never been to France before. I've been to Europe. Um,
Yeah.
lived in Europe when I was a kid, but I hadn't been to France, hadn't done anything like getting a bike and everything over there. So that was a learning experience just in itself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I relied then a lot on the travel agency that used to be kind of the kind of official
Yeah.
U.S. Organizer that would put you up at the hotel and the transport and everything. So um, which was fine. I eventually, now once I learned how to do it, I started doing things myself just to
Yeah.
be able to keep the costs down and kind of tailor things to the way I wanted to do them. But
Yeah.
that year, I relied on that support, and so they, was the hotel and the drop bag and
Okay.
the bus to the hotel, all that stuff was
Yeah.
covered by
So,
them.
Eric, you've gone to, and by the way, your videos again were extremely helpful because I think people always underestimate logistics and can be very stressful.
Yes.
You've, as a rider, gone there four times. Any
Hmm.
kind of nightmare logistic stories that you have, or maybe you don't? Because I know I have at least one or two. And
I haven't had anything really bad happen to me. I've certainly
yeah,
heard about people
yeah,
who, their bike never made it to France, um, and they had to. I mean, I've known people who had to go like buy a bike,
yeah,
find a bike
yeah,
shop in Paris and like buy a bike so they could do the ride.
yeah.
I know one guy who did a ride on a guy's bike who had gone out like right before the event on a training ride, fell and broke his wrist. So he couldn't
Yeah,
ride. So this other guy who had trouble with something went wrong with his bike. But when I was there in 2023, when we were volunteering for the ride,
yeah,
I was on the way to go pick up the one of the rental vehicles that we were putting all the drop bags into. I was on the metro, and a guy tried to pick my pocket. I remember feeling his hand. He wasn't a very
yeah.
good pickpocket, obviously.
Okay, good. Yeah,
But I remember him like reaching into my pocket, and I just looked over at him and said, "No, no, 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 no." And I got off at the next stop. But
yeah.
that would have been a disaster because then I would have had no driver's license, no credit cards. That would have been a disaster.
Oh, yeah.
So narrowly averted that one.
Yeah, I'll tell you my one very briefly, Eric. I've mentioned it before. It was the first time I did it. I got to Paris a few days early, went on a glorious ride around Paris with some friends. I get back to the apartment and I'd locked myself out of the apartment. Okay. And so all I had was my cycling clothes and my bike. And it was this really old apartment building. My brother owns a place there. And I was trying to get a locksmith. I don't speak French. And eventually I get some guy, it's a holiday, and he wanted to break down the front door. And there's no way I was going to do that. My brother didn't have a key. So I actually had to fly two people over from Dublin, Ireland, with keys to get into the apartment.
Oh
So
God.
it was a nightmare. I've never felt more stress in my life Um, anyway, cool. Okay, so then this very first PBP,
Hmm.
you're going to do it on a fixie because you're crazy.
Right.
Did you have any other strategy at all? What was your strategy? And also, maybe, how did you educate yourself on PBP? Because there was no one like you on YouTube back then.
Well, when you're doing all the brevets, obviously you're trying to talk to people, and
Yeah,
that historically, is the way you learned about stuff was just by talking to the other riders, and they
yeah,
would kind of dribble and dribs and drabs of their knowledge. I went there. One of my friends, Peter, had done PvP once before, so he
yeah,
he had been there before, and really the second time you do it is so much easier than the first
yeah,
because you learn so much just doing it the first time. Um, so he knew how to do it, and I really looked to him for a lot of guidance on like how far are we gonna, how fast are we gonna ride, how far are we gonna go today, where are we gonna
yeah,
stop, that kind of stuff. So I learned a tremendous amount from him. I couldn't have done that ride without him.
yeah, yeah. Um, so let's just talk about the actual ride itself. So you've done it 4 times. The last one, unfortunately, was a DNF.
Right.
But so 2007, 2011, 2015,
Hmm.
2019. So maybe we'll talk about that first one, the fixed one that was successful,
Yeah.
and then maybe we can touch on the other two completions and maybe that DNF as well, which always fascinates me as well. So
Yeah.
2007, we know it ended well, but you were exhausted, isn't that right?
Yes. Yeah. 2007. So yeah, we decided we'll take our fixies over there and do the ride on fixed gears. I mean, it's been done on a fixed gear.
Yeah,
Um, and back in the day, that's how everybody did it. Um, but 2007, in terms of conditions, was just atrocious. We had more rain than they've had in decades, 30 or 40
yeah.
years. So the conditions were terrible. It rained on us almost the entire time.
Oh God.
There were a few windows of when it wasn't raining, but then it was still wet.
Yeah.
So it was just, the conditions were atrocious. Um, and then, of course, being on fixed gear bikes and having never done it before, it was a very tough ride.
How old were you? Your very first one? Do you remember?
Well, '07, I would have been 48.
Okay. Which
Yeah,
is kind of the
48.
average age for that very first one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much.
But you would think at 48 you'd be smarter than this, okay? Right? Like, PvP is tough enough, but you were going to do it on a fixed gear bike.
Yeah.
Just to
Well,
ramp up the difficulty, is that right?
well, yeah, and I did the whole brevet series on fixed gears. So, I
Yeah.
had done a 600 on a fixed gear, and I figured, okay, well, if I can do a 600, I can do a 1200.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the conditions were terrible. And then just, I make a point in a lot of the PvP videos that a lot of what that ride is about is just the buildup of little tiny things that become much bigger things. So just the overall effect of never coasting
Oh, yeah.
for 1,200 kilometers
Completely.
uphill, downhill, um, that became a real issue. And then the sleep deprivation, I only got
Yeah.
about 5 or 6 hours of sleep in
You
the
know,
entire thing.
in the rain, there must have been some pretty low moments. Like, did you ever say, "Why am I here? Why am I doing this? I need to go home now."
Yeah, I remember there was one time we had stopped at the control in Carre. So
Yeah.
we were, well out toward, this was on the way out. And it was wet going in, but I don't know if it had started raining, but we were there I was facing into the building, and my friend Peter was sitting across from me looking out, so he could see out the window
Yeah.
and see that it had started raining outside there. And he was just convinced that I was going to look out the window and not go on anymore. Uh, so he starts giving me some like mom and apple pie and
Yeah.
do it for the Gipper type speech, and kind of got me motivated. And I looked out the window and I said, okay, what the f?
Yeah.
Let's just go.
Yeah.
we're, we're there already, so might as well
That's
keep
great.
on going.
Is there anything about a fixie bike that makes it, like you talked about, no coasting, which must make it really hard?
Yeah.
Is it more dangerous in any way, or there's no more danger?
As long as you keep your feet in the pedals.
Okay.
So
Is pacing an issue though with people with geared bikes and just speed? Like you are at a different
yeah,
speed. Yeah.
yeah. It was harder to ride with groups because they tended to be going. I mean, on a fixie, you tend to be, I think, in a smaller window of pace.
Yeah.
Minimum, maximum speed. Um, so if you come to like a long downhill, the guys on regular bikes are going to get out ahead of you, and
Yeah.
so and so it's harder to do that. We were definitely riding overall slower
Yeah.
than if we were on regular bikes, just
Yeah.
because of that.
Was there any comments from French people or just Europeans who are these crazy Americans? And because not many people do it on a fixed bike, is that correct? Is it a more of
No,
a yeah,
it's like 1% of all the people who
yeah,
do PBP do it on a fixed gear, and they still are. I
yeah,
seem to recall that a lot of people from the UK would do it on fixies. Seemed like
yeah?
there was a kind of a, I mean,
That's right. Yeah,
that they have kind of their own crazy stuff like fixies and racing
yeah,
trikes and stuff
yeah.
like that you don't see
They
anywhere else.
yeah.
Um,
We had an
but
English we had an English guy on actually who rode a fixed bike. Every time I said fixie, he just laughed at me. He didn't know what I was talking about. So the differences are funny.
yeah,
Do you remember? Is there anything else from that first one you want to talk about? I certainly want to talk about the people of Brittany and maybe just the support for that very first time and how that
yeah.
felt.
Well, that was a big part of it.
Yeah,
Was that. Um, I remember the first time we slept. So we started early in the morning with the 84-hour start. You start like 5 o'clock in the morning, and we had ridden all through the day and hadn't made our way to Ludiac yet. We were
yeah,
still a little bit outside of Ludiac, but we saw a sign, like just this hand painted sign somebody had made, and it said in the basic French that I could read, here's a chance to sleep where it's dry. So they had opened up a bar. So this is like middle of the night. There's nothing open, but they had
yeah,
opened up this bar, and they were just letting people sleep on the floor. So that was where we got our first sleep, and we slept for maybe an hour or so there,
yeah.
on the cold floor of a French bar out in the middle of the country
Love it.
somewhere.
Which seemed luxurious probably at that
Oh, it was
point.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was it was dry and
yeah. That's cool.
not enough sleep, but it was.
Yeah. So then I'll fast forward to the next one unless you have anything else you want to talk about that very first one.
No, no.
Okay.
So 2011, went back with a different friend who I'd ridden with
Yeah.
on some other.
Well, so first of all, why did you go back? Did when you finished that when that first finish line, did you say, "Oh, I'm coming back in 4 years," or you had to think about?
Well, have you ever heard of Randonnesia?
I have, I
Yes,
have.
Randonnesia
Okay,
finally kicked in.
okay,
Uh,
good.
I honestly, when I finished it, I was probably already thinking I should do this again, but do it on a regular bike.
Yeah, okay,
So I went back on a regular bike with gears and coasting and the whole thing. Better conditions. We still got rained on,
yeah,
uh, but overall better conditions. I got a lot more sleep, um,
yeah.
so
I
had a
think,
much better ride that year.
like to your point, when you do it that second time, you've already had the first childbirth in your life, and you know what to expect, perhaps, and you can correct a lot of things. And that's how I felt with my second one as well.
Yeah.
Anything notable about that 2011 one you want to talk about?
Um, that one wasn't as dramatic
Okay.
as the '07.
Yeah.
Like I said, the conditions were better. We did get rained on
Yeah.
quite a lot at the beginning. I remember one time, my friend Andrea and I we just caught in a downpour, and we were standing in a doorway somewhere, just trying to get as out of
Yeah.
the rain as much as we could, and failing utterly.
Yeah.
But no, that ride was much more fun,
That's
and
good.
being able to enjoy myself and get a little bit more sleep. And
Yeah. And as a matter of interest, are you still as were you still as enthusiastic about doubles in general, like between the PBP years?
yes, oh yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so that didn't wane at all. You're
no,
obviously still doing the Davis thing, but other doubles as well. Okay.
yeah, I kept on doing Triple Crown doubles until, oh gosh, it's been a few years now, but it was still,
Yeah.
well into doing PvP.
Okay.
Um,
Cool. So then 2015 is your third one. Okay. You're
right?
getting good. You're getting really good at this right now. Okay. You're
Mm-hmm.
making all these videos. You're now like a superstar when you go there. I'm sure people recognized you a lot in 2015. Is that right?
2019 they did, because I didn't start doing the
Okay.
PvP
Sorry.
tip until
Yes.
2018.
You're right. That
Um,
would be weird if they recognized you and you hadn't made the video yet. Okay. All right. Cool. I got that wrong. Okay.
so yeah, 2015, a little bit, a little bit different. I stayed in Paris before the ride. Part of what I did the other times that I was staying out toward when it was still starting in Saint Catan, I was staying there or someplace near there. 2015, I felt comfortable enough about being able to get around
Yeah.
in the area and with the trains and such. So stayed in Paris uh, and connected with some other friends from the U.S. who were there, and so we did kind of the typical, let's go
Yeah.
ride around Paris and find an English pub kind of thing, and
Yeah.
so that was a lot of fun, and um, I was again on a regular bike,
Yeah.
and that was the last year they started in Saint Catan. We started at the big velodrome that
Yeah.
year.
And then if your first one was, I think you said you were maybe 48 or something. So this is
Hmm.
12 years later. So you're around 60 at that point, I suspect. Is that right?
Well, let's see, 2015, I would have been 2015, I would have been 56 I think,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So then let's talk about 2019 because I always
Yeah.
think DNFs are really interesting. They're regrettable, but I think you learn a lot. So maybe talk about that DNF. So this would have been your fourth one,
That would have been my fourth one.
and you were already really good at PBP. So
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
happened exactly?
Well, building up to that ride, first of all, I was doing my qualifying rides. So I'd done the 234. Um, I was setting out on the 600K. Uh, Awful conditions. We were riding north out of Davis into just a killer headwind that
Yeah.
never went away. Um, so we were like barely moving, but we were maybe 30, 40 miles out, and somebody ahead of me in the pace line touched wheels. They went down. I rode my bike over them,
Yeah.
uh, crashed, got concussed, and so I DNF'd on that ride.
Okay.
So I ended
Okay.
up turning around and riding back. So I had to do a different 600K, which turned out to be a great ride. There was one more available.
Yeah.
There was one other one, maybe some other part of the country. There's one more in California that I was able to do. So I got all my rides in. But setting out that morning on PvP, first of all, in retrospect, I just wasn't feeling that well. I don't know. I wasn't sick. Legs just weren't doing it that day. You know how it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
Completely. Yeah.
the legs just weren't doing it.
Yeah.
Um, so I wasn't sick, but I was riding slow because I just didn't feel like I had this, was able to go much faster. I had also lost connection with my friend. A friend and I had trained together and done brevets together, and we said, let's go. We're going to do PvP. We're going to support each other. And in the early morning hours in the dark, we got separated. I eventually caught up with him in Milan at that control. He had some bike troubles and was just getting his bike put back
Yeah.
together. But by that point in Milan, I just I was already far enough behind that I would have had to ride all the way to Brest without sleep to
Oh,
get back on the schedule that I needed to be on to finish on time.
yeah.
And I just there wasn't I was not going to be able to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe the me of 12 years before would have said, "Get back on the bike. You're going to go
Yeah.
do it. Ride through the night." Um, but at that point, I figured, well, I've really got. I didn't see that I was going to start riding better.
Yeah.
I looked forward to, 2 or 3 more days of not feeling well and not riding well. Um, so I DNF'd,
Okay.
and I found a little hotel, and
Yeah.
um,
And
so
did you like? I always think, as someone who's DNF'd a lot of different rides. Okay. um, like there's the moment where it's just relief that okay, thankfully I don't have to ride anymore. But then sort of disappointment creeps in. You start thinking, well, maybe I should have kept going. Was there any of that, or you just done PBP so many times that it didn't matter as much?
I I never really felt disappointed. I never second guessed myself like, gosh, I should have gotten back on the bike. I should have. It turned into a different adventure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I stayed overnight, found a little hotel there in the village. So right off the bat, I was able to see parts of Villon that you would never
Yeah.
see because you just ride through a part of it. Um, I got on my bike the next morning and I rode down to Le Mans, where they have the race course, and
Yeah.
saw the cathedral there, and took the train back to Rambouillet, and just my daughter was there, so she had agreed she was going to just kind of go off into Paris by herself.
Yeah.
So, I had that to look forward to, being able to spend a couple more days with her
Yeah.
that I wouldn't have been. So it just turned into a different adventure, and
Yeah, I
I
think
never
that
regretted it.
yeah, I think it comes with age as well. I did a 1400K up in Washington. Actually, when I say I did it, I started. And then maybe after about 900K, the heat I just couldn't go on. But then it meant I got to hang out with my family. So we drove all around Washington.
Yeah,
I was kept saying to myself, "Oh, why the hell did I even want to do that ride?" You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
but 20 years before, I would have been much more upset, I think. So maturity, who knew?
yeah.
That's cool. Okay. So Eric, you've done PBP 4 times, or at least you visited 4 times. You visited 5 times actually, but okay, 4 times on a bicycle. Has there been an evolution in things like nutrition, sleep, even equipment? I'm kind of interested in how things have changed over those 16 years.
Well, certainly from the first one to the other ones, going from the fixed gear to the regular bike, that was a big change. Um, like I said, looking at my bikes back here, I'm very into traditional bikes.
Yeah.
Um, so the second time I did it, I was on uh, a, just kind of basically a road bike
Yeah.
that I put some lower gears onto, and clip-on fenders. My third PVP, I went back with an Alex Singer bike that I was
Oh
able to
wow.
buy. An Alex
Nice.
Singer Random News, um, with full fenders and all that. And I took that bike again in 2023. So my equipment has been pretty much the same,
Yeah. Yeah.
not a whole lot of differences. The lights got better. I mean, the first time I did it, I had a generator, a Schmidt hub, and halogen lights, uh,
Yeah.
which worked. I mean, they were what we had, but not as bright as what we have now. And I remember having to pull over and put a new bulb in because halogen lamps
Yeah.
burn out, and so I remember having to
Wow.
do that. And then the next time, the other ones that I did, I had still a dynamo hub, but now um, some really high quality LED lighting. So that
Yeah.
that certainly got better. My camera equipment got
Definitely. Yeah.
got
Yeah.
better over time.
Yeah.
Um, you know the,
What? Yeah. What about
the
sleep and nutrition?
well, sleep. Once I got on a regular bike and was able to have more time off the bike,
Yeah.
uh, that kind of settled into a pattern. Always slept in Ludiac for at least a few hours. Uh, Usually slept for a little while at Brest, and then again at Ludiac with maybe another nap thrown in
Yeah.
here or there. But getting down from maybe 3, 4 hours of sleep
Yeah.
uh, at a stretch, which was way more than I had the first time.
Yeah.
So that kind of settled into a routine, and that turned out to be fine.
Yeah.
Uh,
What
you know.
about nutrition? Has that changed over those years?
Not especially. I mean,
Okay.
I always brought my own drink mix. So I'd carry,
Yeah.
kind of prepackaged drink bags, in my handlebar bag,
Yeah.
uh, to do, to eat on the bike, or to drink on the bike. Um, I always tried to eat as much as, well, once I was able to have more time to do so, to be able to get off the bike,
Yeah.
um, I was able to have that fun, like the croissant experience or the
Yeah.
crepe experience.
Yeah.
I think the first time I did that was someplace in oh gosh, where's the big castle? I'm blanking on the name. Fougere. And there was a crepe place, and I pulled off and sat down and had some crepes, and I remember they were knew what I was doing, and so I was getting ready to leave, and they came over with a little package full of crepes and a little foil thing. Here was somewhere for the
Yeah.
ride. So that was fun. Was getting off the bike and stopping at some little local places and kind of
Yeah.
watching the world go by for a
That's
little
cool.
while, and then you got to get
Yeah.
back on the bike.
That's cool. I'd like to go back to that Alex Singer bike, actually. So
Hmm.
I visited the store last time I was in Paris, and I didn't
Hmm.
really understand the whole significance, but now I do a lot more. So
Yeah.
is it an older bike, or is it a recently built one?
I ended up with two. I've got two of them.
Yeah.
The one I took to Paris was built in around 2003,
Okay.
for a guy who took it to Paris and rode PBP on it. Um, so it was more recent than my other one, but it was built in the style of the 70s. So it's all friction shifting,
Wow. Yeah.
uh, you know, the Jubilee derailleur and TA cranks. I mean, the whole thing is, it looks like all the parts came off the shelf in the 1970s.
Yeah.
My other one was built earlier, it was about 83, but the components are a little bit more modern. It's got still down tube shifting, but it's
Yeah.
indexed and a little bit more modern in the way it works, but still very traditional,
Okay.
the same basic, you
Yeah.
know,
So
all the Singer
last
stuff.
bike question, which is kind of out of left field, but like you ride a lot more for fun right now. And
Hmm.
how do you decide which of those many bikes that you have do you ride, you know?
They're kind of on a rotation.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a half a dozen or so that I kind of keep in rotation. Um, so it kind of depends on where I'm going, if it's going to be wet or dry. I've got a rain bike that
Yeah.
I don't mind getting dirty.
Do you have a go-to bike if you're not really feeling like riding? Because I do personally. Like it's
Uh,
an easier bike to ride than the others, perhaps.
Kind of. I've got one of the bikes behind me here is a Soma Saga, which is like a touring bike.
Okay.
Um, and it's got kind of bigger, fatter tires,
Yeah.
and it's a little heavier. Has upright bars. So that one's just kind of a little bit more fun.
Yeah,
It
that's how I feel. Like I have this old Lightspeed mountain bike, no suspension, big tires, and if I'm not really feeling riding that much, I'll ride that one because it's so comfortable and easy to ride.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
I just get on that one. And I'm kind of sitting upright a little bit more, and
yeah,
um, I think people like it. I think it looks a little more friendly than a racing bike because it
yes,
doesn't
yeah,
look like a fast bike,
yeah,
and it's got the fenders and the racks and everything. And people always, oh gosh, you got everything on that bike, don't you?
nice,
Um, but I think it's a little bit more of a conversation
cool.
starter.
Okay, so then the next question I normally ask, because I want to talk about your volunteering as well. I normally ask, are you going to do it again? But I've seen some of your videos. You've decided
Hmm.
you're not going to do any more PBPs,
No,
which
no, I think I'm done with that.
Um, So, like, maybe you want to talk about your changing relationship with biking in general, okay? Because
Hmm.
you also had another excellent video on that topic, which I think is very interesting. Like, to me, you need a certain amount of sickness to do any of these rides. And I think as one gets older, maybe you become more rational, okay? I don't know.
Yeah.
So, tell me about that.
Well, I think we both share a compulsion in some ways with maintaining streaks. Like, okay,
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
done. I've done the Davis double. I'm going to do it again next year, and then the next year, and the next year. And by that time, it's like, oh my God, I can't break this streak. I've got to
I
go
know.
back next year and do it
Yes.
again. And that really came to an end for me. I think in one very specific place. I was already kind of thinking about this, but this was about 8 years ago or so. I was on a double century here. Uh, we're up in the Napa Valley at a rest stop, and I was talking to a friend of mine and kind of sharing, which rides we're going to do. And I mentioned that, I was going to do that ride and the Davis Double, and then another one down in Southern California, and a course down there in Southern California that I didn't really like. I mean, I did the ride every year because it was convenient. And he said, Eric, you don't have to do it. Nobody. I'll never forget. He said, nobody really cares.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, yeah, that's right. Nobody
Yeah.
really does care. If I stop doing these rides, they're going to keep on happening, and the world is going to keep on spinning.
Yeah.
Um, so that one moment was where it really hit me that,
Yeah.
yeah, why am I doing this? If I'm just doing it to maintain the streak, well, that doesn't really mean as much to me as it used to. And then the
Yeah.
Davis Double, kind of the same thing happened. They stopped having the ride during COVID,
Yeah.
so yeah, I wasn't able to do it. And that, I think, just helped kind of get me out of the mindset that I had to do
Yeah.
that ride
Yeah.
every year. So I've changed up what I've done on that ride, and now I organize the workers ride that is done the week before for people who are going to volunteer day of and
Yeah.
help the riders. We do a workers ride, and so I've organized that, and I get all the food together and follow them around the course and everything,
Yeah.
and that's great fun.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm having just as much fun as I would if I was riding my bike, but it's just
Yeah.
different.
So in 2023, you volunteered at PBP. You did the drop bag service.
Yes.
Thank you very much, by the way. You did a great job. You really helped me. Was kind of volunteering part of that? You wanted to stay connected a little bit to PBP, or you tell me?
Well, yeah, it was partly that. Part of it was that the company that used to do that drop bag service decided not to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So there was a void there, and a friend of mine, Deb Banks, who you probably know,
Yeah.
very very big in the rando world. Um, she said, she pitched the idea of, let's get together a small group and we'll go do the drop bag service.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was partly just wanting to stay connected and, provide the service,
Yeah.
uh, and see the ride from a different perspective. So being there in Ludiac, and it was just fascinating, just
Oh, I can
watching
imagine.
watching that place change
Yeah.
over time.
Am I right in saying, like, I think this is probably not a good analogy, but when everyone's drinking together, we don't really see ourselves when we've been drinking. Like I wonder, as a volunteer, you see
Hmm.
people probably who are very stressed. Are they a little bit rude at times? Are they kind of snippy, not thankful, or
I don't remember anybody being
yeah,
that bad.
yeah,
We were kind of grousing a little bit about some of the
okay,
riders. We tried to tell people, bring a small bag,
yes,
just enough stuff. We had guys who had like 50 pounds worth of stuff in a duffel bag, and enough food to feed an army, and
yeah, yeah,
we're having to schlep all these bags all over the place. And so
yeah,
there were there one, I won't use his name, but
yeah.
Deb and uh, the other people know exactly who he is. He will be burned forever in our memories as
Okay,
having the absolute worst bag.
yeah,
But for
but
the most part, it
yeah,
was interesting. We were in, sorry about that.
no problem.
Uh, we were in a room that was used by a couple other groups. There was another group that was doing this as a service, and then the Japanese were there.
Yeah,
And that was just very interesting to see them coming in and kind of how they did
different
everything.
culture. Yeah,
Yeah,
fascinating. Like
yeah,
I would imagine volunteering as well. Everyone is just so um, they feel very pressed for time. They just feel that urgency, and they probably don't want to hang out and talk. They just want to get their bags, move on with their lives very
yeah,
very quickly. Which
yeah. Pretty much. I
maybe
mean,
you yeah yeah
there were a
okay
few people that we talked to, but yeah, for the most part, they, we had a system, so we kept the bags very much under control, so we
yeah
knew who was there and who had picked up their bags and so on.
yeah.
I'll tell you, it was a lot of work. It
Oh, I
was
know.
it
Believe
was a
me,
lot
I
of
know
work.
it's a huge amount of work, right? That's why I asked because, and it's probably somewhat thankless in certain areas as well, you know?
Well, like like you, everybody I think was really glad that we were there doing it,
Yeah.
whether they were saying it or not.
Okay.
They were,
Yeah.
and we didn't lose anybody's bag.
Nice.
Um, I
Nice.
remember one guy, yeah, actually one person. Uh, we were back in Rambouillet, and all the bags were in the truck, and he wanted his bag. He was trying to get out of town early, and it was buried under a mountain of other bags, and we just said no, we're not.
Yeah.
He was not too happy about that, but
Yeah. So we know you're not riding again. Will you volunteer again, do you think?
no, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
I'm done with PBP.
Okay. Okay.
There's other things I want to do.
Yeah. Perfect.
I've talked with friends. I'm not sure if I'll do it, but we always thought it would be fun to go do that. Maybe do that same course or do slightly different course, but over a week or 10 days. You
Yeah.
know,
Completely. Like normal
shorter
people. Yeah.
distances and hotels to sleep in and showers and
Yeah.
you know, just go do it as a tour and just have a little bit more fun.
Cool.
Um,
So, Eric, we're going to end with this final part, okay?
mhm.
And it's 3 tips that guarantee a finish for PBP. And I've watched all your videos, so I know you've got like probably 300 different tips to choose from.
Mhm.
So we're going to go one, two, three.
Oh gosh, I did a video on this where I did like my top 10 tips, but
Okay.
um, just some things to keep in mind. I think one is that finishing PvP is not about being the fastest rider or the strongest rider. There are plenty of fast and strong people who will never finish that ride uh, uh, because so much of it is just knowing how to do it and being in that mindset of finishing the ride. Uh, it's more than half mental, in my opinion. It's maybe three-fourths or more of it is just
Yeah.
being mentally prepared, having the knowledge, which is why I did my video series, and just knowing what you're doing.
Okay. So
Far
that's,
more than
yeah.
training.
That was tip number
Um,
1. You started very strong, by the way. I like that one a lot.
um, I make a big deal in my videos about time and keeping track of time off the bike because every time you stop and you get off the bike, the clock is ticking and you're not going anywhere. So you have to make that time pay for itself. You have to make it worth it. So uh, if you're going to a control, uh, figure out what you're going to do. Um, and again, that's where the second time, once you've been to the controls, you know where you park the bikes over here, and you know where the restrooms are over there, you know where the food is, whatever. It Part of the first one is just figuring all that stuff out. And you waste a lot of time just
Yeah.
like wandering around trying to find where everything is.
Yeah.
But staying on the bike, my friend Peter, the guy who taught me a lot of what I know about it, we call it rest stop management,
Yeah.
and just staying on the bike, constant forward motion, and just staying on the bike. Even if you're not going very fast, just get on the bike and keep
Yeah.
on going. Don't sit there and lament how tired you feel. Get back on the bike and grouse about how tired you feel,
Yeah.
but keep on going.
Yeah. So true. Okay. That was number 2. Another strong one, Eric. This is good. At this point, they're almost guaranteed to finish.
And I would say, in terms of equipment choice, I think the most important thing is just finding a comfortable bike. there's plenty of light bikes, and and I think more and more every year you see people riding PBP on bikes that, to me, just look ridiculous. There's something that look like they're trying to race, a stage of the Tour de France on these bikes.
Yeah.
Um, I think far more important than having a light bike or the most recent components or whatever is having a comfortable bike that you've ridden on a lot, that you can sit on for a long time. So it's saddle choice and position on the bike,
Yeah.
getting your shoes, your shorts, all the things that combine, the bike, the contact points, getting all that stuff nailed down so that you can sit on that bike for a long time uh, and still feel comfortable. I
Perfect.
think that's a very
Yeah.
big thing.
Eric, 3 excellent tips. Thank you so much. And, personally, again, I really want to thank you for all the videos you've made. You've helped so many people. You've certainly helped me. And hopefully we'll see a lot more videos in the future. But thank you again, okay?
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.